Hey everybody, today we're going to be ranking the best budget decks in Standard right now. Budget means a lot of different things to a lot of different folks. Today I'm going to be talking about decks that you can realistically build into from a new player experience or a returning player, or maybe somebody that plays Magic but is new to Magic Arena, right? Cards that are easy to acquire with the number of wild cards that you have. It should translate to cards that are not as expensive as other cards because Magic is an expensive hobby. But for a lot of people coming into the hobby, building a standard deck and playing standard is one of those first level up goals that they have before they go ahead and get into some older formats. So a couple of real quick things to get out of the way. The first part of this video will be monocolored decks, and then we'll go into two-color decks in the second half. Monocolored decks are often more budget-friendly because you don't have the lands that you need to get. Most of the time on Arena, those dual lands that you need are rares, and so it becomes this like uncanny valley of, you have uncommons, you have mythics even maybe, but it's the rare slot that becomes the most challenging to get. So we'll talk about the monocolor decks first, and then we'll move into two color. So we're going to jump into the first one here, which is the green Tifa combo. And so when we look at a deck list like this, the deck revolves around the combination of Tifa, which is a rare, which you need 4 of, and Bristly Bill, which is a mythic and a 4 of from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. The backup cards to these main pieces are Zaz Chocobo, and it's surrounded by things like Acceleration with Llanowar Elves. Llanowar Elves is a common that you will need for quite a few decks, and it also helps accelerate you out that much faster. These kind of green aggro decks, whether they have a combo win like Tifa does or without a combo win, right? If they're just straight green aggro, they rely on the fact that most of the time pump spells are in lower rarity. So you're talking about common or uncommon. Here we're using a combination of Bushwhack at common, Snakeskin Veil at uncommon, and Overprotect at uncommon. So these cards help push the power. They make your Tifa and the rest of the cards better in combat so that you're always pushing down as much damage as possible. For the lands, Escape Tunnel and Evolving Wilds are commons that you can use. As you start accumulating cards, if you have something like Fabled Passage in your collection, you should be using Fabled Passage instead of one of the cards where it always comes in tapped, just because sometimes it comes in untapped if you have 4 or more lands. So this is a strict upgrade to something like Evolving Wilds, but not something that you need to run out and get 4 of immediately in order to play the deck. The only things you really need to play the deck are Tifa and Bristly Bill. That's where you need to go ahead and get started. So for this green Tifa combo deck, I am going to go ahead and rate this an A deck. I do have a video on this deck on the channel if you want to see this deck, a full deck tech, and see it in action. It's on the channel. The next deck we're going to talk about is Mono Black. And for Mono Black, we're talking about using the combination of Deep Cavern Bat, which is a staple in this format, and Unstable Slasher, a 4 of. It is a rare, but it does an effect that most cards don't do. And so this is something that if you have them, if you start collecting them, you're definitely going to want to use them. The removal, again, most of the removal, like cards like Duress, are not at higher rarities, and so it's easier on the budget than some other decks are. The Charm Cycle is one of the exceptions, right? Those are rare cards that are in that removals area, but a lot of the other cards, like Tragic Trajectory, Duress, Shoot the Sheriff, are not. The removal package can be tailored here. You don't necessarily need the rare removal. It really is working through the creatures. For the mono black deck, this deck does seem to be a step down from the green deck. I don't have a lot of familiarity with it, but I have played against it many times, and while it definitely does hold up, specifically the demon synergies with like Unholy Annex, right? Those synergies do hold up. The deck as a whole, I do think, is a little bit lower on this list. So I'm going to go ahead and put it as a C. That doesn't mean it's a bad deck. If it's your deck, if it's a deck you really like, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. If you want to post your deck list, I'll be happy to take a look at your particular deck list. But I think for most people, I think they would have a better time with either mono green or the deck coming up, which is mono red. So talking about mono red, this is a deck that comes up in almost every format. It is highlighted with quick creatures that come out fast, hit hard, and then the removal that you have to get your opponent's creatures out of the way, and then sometimes lightning strike or burst lightning to the face to finish off your opponent. These decks, generally speaking, rely on uncommons for most of the curve, up until the 3-drop and 4-drop spot, where you do end up seeing some more higher rarity cards. Screaming Nemesis is a mythic that is really important in the deck, and I don't know if you're going to play this deck if you can really get away from this card, and so this is something that needs to go in the collection as soon as possible if you're looking to play this type of card or this type of deck. But the creatures themselves, the Hired Claws, the Emberheart Challengers, the Needlehead, those type of creatures are generally speaking at lower rarity, and you have the Lightning Strikes, Abrades, and Burst Lightnings are also lower rarity. You could build this deck with all common and uncommons. You're not going to have as much success as you will with some of the higher rarity cards, but it is possible. One thing I like to do is find a couple of deck lists and kind of go through the sideboard for some of the common and uncommon cards that are here in the sideboard, and then use them as your first kind of line of thought on moving into the main deck. Specifically, if you're playing on Arena and Best of One, you really only have that one game to really push out there. If you're a paper player, then you kind of want to make sure you're getting ahead on the first game, because you might fall behind in the second and third games. So mono red is a great deck in not just this format, but every format. Every format will have a mono red deck, so if you invest in some of the pieces now, when rotation comes, it's not like you're building a whole new deck next rotation cycle. This deck will be viable in some form for all the cycles, right? And so for that reason, mono red is going to be a little bit higher than mono black. We'll put this in the B territory. It does have the chance to move up to the A territory, because it's always around, and it's just finding the right combination of those red spells that get you out on the board really early, and then give you some chance to close the game when your opponent kind of builds a bigger board than you. Now, moving on from there, we start talking about the 2-color decks, and the first 2-color deck we're going to talk is Boros Aggro. And so for the Boros Aggro deck, you'll notice that this is a very similar list, except for it has 3 cards in the main deck that are white, and one of them, though, is usually played with red mana instead of the white side. So this is only a couple of cards away from the mono red deck. So if this is the type of card, type of deck you would like to play, you certainly could start with a mono red aggro deck, and then as you're collecting the lands, you're going to go ahead and start moving into a splash color like you would in draft, right? Start splashing the white until you have enough to really make sure that you can sustain 2 colors. So for this deck, while it has a very similar early game where you're being aggressive, and it does have that Screaming Nemesis again, that is a format staple, it also adds something like Clarion Conqueror that turns off activated abilities, which is more on brand for the meta. So if you're playing something like Best of 3, if you're playing something like Paper Tournaments, you can expect more cards that have those activated abilities. It covers more of a range of decks, and it's more important to have these kind of effects. This is something that you would be more likely to do well with. If you're just playing Best of 1 and you're just playing very casually, sit down, play Magic for 10 minutes at a time and just go all out on one strategy, the linear strategy of mono red makes sense. But when you kind of graduate to that next level, whether it's more competitive play or paper play or Best of 3 play, you may need something that has a little bit more staying power, which you would get with something like Boros aggro. So for that reason, for the reason that it's easy to build into, I'm gonna go ahead and give Boros aggro an A rating. Now please note that, you know, because if you were trying to build a Boros aggro, if that's your ultimate end goal, then mono red becomes much more attractive as your first deck to get into, as on your way to building that Boros aggro. So if you're looking for Boros aggro, remember that mono red just gets a bump up. Another really fun deck is the Gruul dinosaur. So this is a red-green dino ramp deck, and it uses both Llanowar Elf and Ixali's Lorekeeper to ramp yourself starting as early as turn 2 to start pushing out 3-drops early on. Get the bigger dinosaurs on the battlefield. If you have the smaller ones like Belligerent Yearling, you're going to go ahead and replace the power with the power of something like Palali's Hatcher. So that would make your Yearling a 5 power creature with trample to be able to get in and then follow up with these larger creatures. You'll notice that Screaming Nemesis is also in this deck list. So here's a card where your wild card investment or your dollar investment in this card certainly is going to stretch further than if you're getting cards that are specifically only for one deck. The Trumpeting Carnosaur, this is a creature that comes out, but it is also a removal spell. If you need to play it in the mid-game for 3 mana, you could discard this to deal 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. So you're getting kind of best of both worlds there. A lot of these dinosaur cards are included with the cards that you're getting from the starter decks, and so this is a great deck to kind of think about building and see how many rares and mythics you are away from building this early on. And so for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and put this dino deck, I'm going to go ahead and put this as a B deck. It doesn't have the ceiling of the Boros aggro deck, because at its very heart it is only a creature deck. And I don't say only in a pejorative way, but there will be decks that will be able to handle creature decks, and you will have a hard time fighting through that as you get kind of in more and more competitive play. As you are moving up the ranks and you're getting to the diamond and the mythic ranks, you're going to have a hard time fighting through if you only have a creature deck. Another great option is green-black midrange. And so most formats have a green-black midrange deck that looks similar. This is a deck that specifically uses Llanowar Elf again. Remember, wildcard investment when you keep hearing the same cards multiple times. to push out specifically the 4 drops that are big time cards that are going to give you a lot of value. This is a 4 mana 1/3, and this is a mythic, and so it does take considerable investments. But at the beginning of your combat, you get X 1/1 counters on all the creatures you control, where X is this creature's power. So on the very first turn that you play this, the other creatures that you have on board that could attack are all going to get +1/+1 counters. And then the following turn, because this would also get that +1/+1 counter, at the very minimum, everything would get 2, and then the following turn, everything would get 4. And so it does ramp up very nicely. It uses the removal suite that we've talked about on the mono black deck, but with a more creature centered aggro approach. These are usually bigger land creatures, whereas the mono black deck had some flyers that were over there pinging in for damage. This is something that uses kind of bigger creatures and attacks less often, but goes ahead and attacks harder. This is another deck that uses this Unholy Annex. Again, another sign that that is a big time format staple that you might want to go ahead and invest in. This deck, I believe, is a B deck. I think this is a really good choice for a lot of players. It is kind of that medium kind of play of Magic where you're in that mid-range. You are faster than the slower controlling decks, but you are more powerful than the aggro decks, and so there's a lot of play in there, and there's a lot of play with your sideboard on how you're going to kind of either move up or move down on that kind of speed scale, where you're going to kind of find your wins. The next deck we're going to play against is actually one of my favorite decks. This is a black-white raise the past aristocrats strategy. I do have multiple videos of this deck on the channel. This is a really fun deck that kind of plays around in that black-white life gain space from the starter decks. And let's take a look at the deck list. This is a deck that uses a lot of cards from foundations that are going to be in standard for the full 5 years rather than the 2 years that the normal cards are. So things like Raise the Past, Infestation Sage, the Vengeful Blood Witch. These are all foundation cards. So once you do have them in your collection, you'll be able to use them for quite a while. Raise the Past is the only card that is absolutely necessary in this deck. And then the other cards that you would be wanting to get are these 1-drops. The Infestation Sage is a common. Nesting Bot is an uncommon from Aether Drift. And the Link Breaker, this is a common from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. And so this is an aristocrat style deck that it uses small creatures and sacrificing small creatures for some kind of value. But if you notice, these small creatures that we're talking about, this is a 1/1 that replaces itself with another 1/1, and so you're not getting 1 card to sacrifice, you're getting 2 cards to sacrifice with something like Infestation Stage. Same with Nesting Bot, same with Link Breaker. And so while you have 9 copies in the deck, this is really 18 creatures there to be able to be sacrificed. The deck does get better with some of the mythic rares like Sephiroth from the Final Fantasy set. No doubt that this is a great card that you want to invest in, but you don't need it from the very beginning in order to play the deck, right? Raise the Past brings back everything with converted mana cost 2 or less, and so all of these 1 and 2 drops are the main bulk of your deck because these are the cards that will be coming back. and then usually you would be using a sacrifice trigger to make sure that one of your creatures dies, and then something like Vengeful Blood Witch or Sephiroth to get a ping every time you do that. So you will be draining them for 1, and you will be gaining 1 life yourself. This deck is kind of mana intensive, so you'll notice if this Nesting Bot was a black card, you would have all black 1-drops, right? But you don't. You have white and black 1-drops, which means you do need to invest in the lands in order to make sure that you have that consistency. If you are if you are a best of 1 player that is only going to be playing a couple of minutes a day, you don't necessarily need that consistency, but the more serious you're taking it, the more competitive you're looking to play, you're going to want that consistency just so that you have the best chance of winning every game. So for that reason, I think Raise the Past is an amazing deck. I think it's a lot of fun. It really does help teach you about triggers if that's something, if you're first coming into the game and you really want to learn about a strategy that works. It has a natural path from the white-black life gain decks, so I'm going to go ahead and put this in the S tier. Again, if you aren't a fan of the strategy, you feel free to lower it yourself, but I believe it's a great deck and a great deck for newer players to get into. And the last deck that we're going to talk about is White-Black Bounce. Now, this is a deck that was kind of from the Esper Bounce from the previous standard before a lot of the pieces had gotten banned. So this is using things like Nurturing Pixie and Sun Pearl Kirin to bounce your creatures and bounce your permanents, I should say, back to your hand so you can reuse some of the removal. Something like Nowhere to Run, right, is used and it sits on the battlefield, and normally you wouldn't be able to have it again, but something like Nurturing Pixie can go in there and bounce it back to your hand so that you can play it again. One more time, I want to point out Unholy Annex being a great card that is there again. Format staples are something that you can go ahead and invest in because you'll know you'll use them in multiple decks. Desecration Demon also shows up. This is a great card, a 4-mana 6/6. At the beginning of combat, any opponent may sacrifice a creature. If you do, tap this and put a +1/+1 counter on it. If you get this out even extra early, right, this is something that will really hinder your opponent's ability to attack, because they're always going to have to be sacrificing even a small creature to make sure that this is not counterattacking, and then it is a demon for this Unholy Annex, and it has a nice synergy there. Orzhov Self-Bounce. This does feel, if you've been playing for a while, this does feel like a worse version of the Town Isn't Big Enough deck, and so for that reason, it's not normally the first deck that I think of when it comes to new players, and so I will go ahead and rank this deck a little bit lower. Again, personal preference. If you're looking for white-black, I think Raise the Past is an outrageously fun deck that does something and attacks on more than one vector. So that's my personal opinion, but your mileage may vary. If you have some experience with these decks, please leave a comment below, and if you have a deck list that you like to use, please go ahead and leave it there. Sometimes as budget Magic players, we find that the resources that are there for deck lists are geared more towards competitive players, and every card has to be the optimal choice, and so it does end up getting more expensive. If you have deck lists that are more budget friendly, please drop them below, because that's what we are looking for. Not to say that you can't invest in a deck, but you certainly want to start off on a budget version so that you can kind of get the feel of the deck and know if this is something that you want to play for the next whole standard season, which is a year, right? So These are my rankings. I think any of these decks are a great introduction to Standard and is a great way to dip your toe into the format. If you like content like this, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and put a comment below. I'm really trying to turn this channel into a community. Magic sometimes is a very personal game where you are playing your way, you are playing with your specific budget, with your specific formats, with your specific pet cards, and sometimes it can feel a little bit isolating where you're not getting enough opinions from other players that may be a little bit casual, and most of what you see out there that are in the one-on-one space is a little bit more tuned to competitive players. So we'd really love to hear other people's opinion. These tier list rankings, these are just my opinions. That's not set in stone anywhere. This is just what I advocate for my friends that are getting into Magic, and so I give those opinions to you guys as well. But if you have differing opinions, I'd love to hear them, and I'd love to start the conversation in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you, everybody.